A man pops a little blue pill, eager to prove he's still got it, but just as his little pistol wakes up to a woman's call, a sniper's scope zeroes in on his heart. In a flash, a squad of assassins swarms him. Every shot hits the mark. He was once a legendary hitman, now taken out by a bunch of rookies. The killers rush back to report their success, but their boss isn't celebrating. In fact, he looks troubled. Why? Because this assassin agency has a quirky rule. Hitmen get a glorious retirement at 50, but their greedy boss doesn't want to cough up those hefty retirement checks. So he hatches a plan to quietly eliminate the old-timers. Now, his biggest headache is Duncan set to retire in just 2 weeks with a whopping $8 million payout. Problem is, Duncan's a battle-hardened vet who's near impossible to kill. One of the underlings came up with a dirty plan: send Duncan on a mission no one could survive. The contact called Duncan, planning to brief him on the target, but Duncan swaps out his SIM card every 10 seconds, a habit he's kept for 30 years, his foolproof way of staying off the grid. One glance at the target's photo, and Duncan instantly had a plan. Disguised as a repairman, Duncan arrived at the target's hotel and deliberately created a deafening racket. Just as expected, the fat man stormed out in a rage, shouting and cursing, playing right into Duncan's hands. Before the guy could throw a punch, Duncan swung a hammer straight at him. Now, the fat man hung there like a wall-mounted Jesus, completely immobilized despite his desperate struggle. Meanwhile, Duncan dropped to the ground and silently took out the nearby bodyguards. He didn't rush to kill the fat man. Instead, he calmly walked over and finished off any survivors with precise shots. Then, he did a sweep of the room, checking for traps only to find a file on the table with his own photo and info on it. It hit him like lightning. Just like his old colleagues who were retired early, he was the real target of this mission.
Pero parece que soy yo el que quiere matar. ¿No? ¿Sabes quién hizo la orden? No sé.
When the fat man clammed up and refused to talk, Duncan grabbed a power drill and pressed it against his skull. Even with the drill bit closing in on his skull, the fat man still didn't dare give up the mastermind. So Duncan ended it with a bullet to the brain and made sure to snap a photo of the corpse to send back to his contact. Once the final payment hit his account, he swapped in a fresh SIM card and made the call.
Duncan. You want the second half of my payment in 24 hours. Maybe enough. Somebody set me up over here. You better pray you have nothing to do with it.
Duncan.
Don't ever contact me again.
His handler was furious, storming into the boss's office to report that Duncan had figured everything out. But the boss stayed cool. He'd already dispatched his elite hit squad. They'd tracked down Duncan's personal accountant and tortured out the addresses of all his known properties. But Duncan never stayed in one place for long, so now, the killers had to check each location one by one. At a beachfront villa, a seductive woman named Cindy knocked on the door, her hips swaying with every step. A bald man opened up, beaming as he invited her in. But once the door was locked, his hands turned grabby and he slapped her, revealing a twisted little fetish. That's when the hit squad burst in, repaying every blow the creep had dished out before putting a bullet in his head when he failed to give up Duncan's location. Cindy lunged forward and turned the bald creep into Swiss cheese with a flurry of stabs. Just then, the boss called, ordering them to head to the next location. In the next house lived a 500-pound cross-dressing pervert. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't strangle him. The guy was just too massive. The company was in full meltdown mode, demanding they find Duncan within 3 days. No excuses. So, they decided to end the fight quickly and cleanly, but just as they were about to leave, they realized the bullets hadn't even pierced the guy's fat. Meanwhile, Duncan had no clue he was being hunted. He was already living his dream retirement. He'd adopted a puppy for companionship and was unwinding with top-shelf whiskey. But in the dead of night, memories of blood-soaked battles crept into his dreams. When he buried the puppy's tiny body, he couldn't help but mutter, "Nothing alive ever stays with me." Still, when he saw his neighbor, a young woman struggling to chop firewood, something tender stirred again in his heart. The next day, he went out and bought a goldfish, quietly hoping this one might live a little longer. Later, the girl returned home to find her yard filled with neatly chopped firewood. Intrigued by this gruff yet kind stranger, she hesitated, curious but too shy to speak. But fate had other plans. The next day, they bumped into each other on the street. This time, she didn't look away. Instead, she raised a hand and greeted him. Sitting side by side at a little cafe, Duncan felt something stir inside his long-frozen heart beginning to thaw. The girl showed Duncan a few photos she had taken and curiously asked him what he did for a living. Duncan, ever careful, replied that he worked in the funeral industry serving clients in 99 different countries. When she raised an eyebrow in disbelief, he rattled off a rapid-fire list of fake services and clients, smooth as a waiter reciting a menu.
Andorra, Afghanistan, Argentina, Algeria, Austria, Australia.
Impressed and a little starstruck, she invited him to give a guest lecture at the kindergarten where she worked. Standing before a room full of wide-eyed kids, Duncan gave an impromptu show and tell.
And here. Boom.
The kids stared at him with wide eyes, full of envy and admiration, eagerly raising their hands to ask questions.
What clothes do they wear in Africa?
Summer clothes. White. A lot of red.
How do they bury people in India?
They burn them.
Do they speak American in England?
They don't speak a lot.
With street smarts no classroom could offer, Duncan earned himself a paycheck and used that one honest wage to buy the girl a birthday gift. She lit up with surprise until she opened the box to find a handgun inside. Ever the romantic, Duncan had even included a free shooting lesson, just in case she didn't know how to use it. But her hands trembled no matter how hard she tried. She just couldn't pull the trigger.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll get you something else. I still have the receipt.
Determined to find something a little more appropriate, Duncan went to the local grocery store and asked the shopkeeper for gift advice. But just as he stepped out with the new present, the hit squad finally caught sight of him. On his way home, Duncan spotted a girl stranded on the roadside in a blizzard. Moved by her ambition and grit, he decided to give her a lift. The snowstorm outside gave their secluded cabin an air of intimacy. The girl leaned in close, her words laced with temptation, unaware that Duncan's nickname was the Cabin King. But just as things started heating up, a hidden device on her chest quietly activated. Outside, her teammate lined up a shot sniper scope trained on Duncan's back. But at the critical moment, the shot went wide, hitting the girl instead. Duncan whipped out his gun and fired back, unleashing a hail of bullets that kept the assassins from closing in. But no matter where he hid, the girl kept shouting out his position like she had a GPS locked on him. With no other choice, Duncan grabbed an axe and took out the chatty traitor first. By the time the hit squad stormed in, Duncan had already vanished without a trace. Outside, the sniper suddenly froze. Duncan was standing right behind him. His teammates called over comms, but the sniper never answered again. Duncan calmly slipped on his earpiece. The counterattack had officially begun. The tables had turned. Now it was Duncan's show. Naked and still as a predator, he lay in wait, eyes locked on the targets inside the house. Once the room was swallowed in darkness, he flipped on his night vision goggles. Panicked, the killers tossed in flashbangs to disrupt his vision. One female assassin kept talking non-stop to draw his attention, while another silently crept around to flank him from behind. But after unloading a full magazine, the assassin was stunned. Duncan hadn't moved an inch. A second later, the assassin's leg was blown out by a bullet. Duncan had set the trap first. He dropped down like the Reaper himself and finished the job with a single, clean shot. Now, only the female assassin was left. Duncan picked up the sniper rifle again. With just a faint breath from the female assassin, Duncan nailed the shot with deadly precision. Rummaging through his clothes, he found a keycard and traced it back to the assassin's hideout. Inside was a dazed young woman, clearly not all there. Duncan was about to let her go until she mumbled something about the innocent neighbor girl being captured by the company. His face hardened as he strode through the streets and headed into a bar to find an old friend. Though too old to fight, the friend managed to track down the location where the girl was being held. Before Duncan left, his friend gripped his hand tightly, warning him to be careful. But betrayal ran deep. His friend had already been bought off by the boss. The drink was laced. Duncan passed out. When he woke up, he was hanging in a warehouse. The boss opened a toolbox of torture instruments and even showed Duncan footage of the neighbor girl's suffering.
I'm gonna have a little fun with your lady, and you're gonna watch.
The torture lasted 3 full days, tool after tool. By the end, Duncan's face was unrecognizable and he'd lost one of his eyes. One night, Duncan dug out the blade fragments still buried in his body. With sheer willpower, he unlocked his shackles and waited in silence for the perfect moment. When the goons came back and opened the door, Duncan sprang to life, launching a brutal counterattack that caught them completely off guard. But this was only the beginning of his revenge. The boss heard the screams echoing from the warehouse and froze, too terrified to step inside. Suddenly, the lights exploded. Duncan had shot out the main circuit. In total darkness, the slaughter began. One by one, the henchmen fell, while the boss used the chaos to make a run for it. But Duncan followed, stalking him down the endless corridor like a grim reaper. After taking out the last enemy, Duncan, barely alive, staggered out of the warehouse. He found an old colleague and borrowed a phone to call the middleman.
Speak.
I'll make you a trade. Me for the girl. You hear me?
I heard you.
Slipping in and out of consciousness, Duncan drifted into a memory years ago. He had mistakenly killed an innocent family during a mission. By the time he realized his error, only a 7-year-old girl remained. That girl had grown up to become his kind-hearted neighbor, the one he now risked everything to save. Though badly wounded, Duncan still gathered every weapon from his old hideout. He headed alone to the meeting point, unaware that the boss had dispatched every remaining killer to ambush him. This time, Duncan stayed on the line for 47 seconds, long enough to give away his location.
Was I on the phone too long?
47 seconds.
Guess we do get rusty when we turn 50.
Surrounded by assassins, Duncan lit a cigarette, his face unreadable. As they closed in, he calmly placed the cigarette on his car. The boss, watching through surveillance, thought the trap had been sprung. He had no idea Duncan had planned everything. With cold precision, Duncan picked up the cigarette butt and made his move. He finished off the attackers, then set his sights on the boss's final hideout. Panicked, the boss called in the last of his bodyguards, but as Duncan walked through the door, their confidence shattered. Knowing they didn't stand a chance, the guards dropped everything and fled in fear. When Duncan entered the boss's lair, the guards didn't even try to stop him. In fact, some even guided him in. They were too busy running for their lives to dare stand in his path. By the time Duncan reached the office, the boss was fully armed and ready for a final showdown. But Duncan simply raised his axe, and a second later, the boss's head was hurled out the window. Then Duncan found the innocent neighbor girl, but she had been tortured beyond recognition. With a tenderness that cut through the violence, he gently picked her up and carried her into the night. From that moment on, he vowed to stay by her side day and night to repay his debt with a lifetime of quiet devotion. But one day, she vanished. All that remained on her bed were old newspaper clippings about the family Duncan had accidentally killed years ago. Flashbacks hit him like a flood, images of that tragic mission, the innocent blood on his hands. And in those memories, the little girl had already burned Duncan's face into her heart. Snapping back to the present, Duncan turned only to find her pointing a gun at him. He had taught her how to shoot, and now he was facing the consequence.
I feel my brother's soft cheek on my shoulder. His hair smelled of little boy. I loved him. I can feel my mother's warm hand wrapped around mine. Always warm. All of her is warm because she's about to have my baby sister. I can smell the cigarette my father just put out. He smelled of cigarettes and aftershave. I liked it a lot. I can feel them, but I can't see them. Only you. Why didn't you just shoot me?
With his skills, disarming her would have been effortless, but he didn't move. All he wanted now was to say sorry. He had funded her secretly for years, hoping to buy a sliver of redemption, but now he understood there is no redemption. Only blood can pay for blood. A gunshot cracked through the silence, scattering a flock of crows into the sky. But she didn't pull the trigger on Duncan. Instead, she asked him one question.
Do you know who wanted my father dead?
No.
Can we find out?
I can try.
Now retired, Duncan had all the time in the world to help her hunt down those truly responsible. He no longer killed for money, but for redemption. He still had bullets to spare.